The forest was alive with a soft, endless hum as Lily and her uncle Mark drove their dusty old pickup deeper into the Cascade Mountains. It was the kind of evening where sunlight fell in golden streaks between the evergreens, and the air smelled of pine, damp earth, and something ancient that seemed to breathe with the trees themselves. Mark had promised Lily a weekend away from everything, no phones, no noise, just stars and stories by the fire. She leaned her head against the window, watching the shadows stretch longer across the trail as they climbed higher. The radio crackled, then cut out completely. Mark laughed, tapping it twice. Guess it's just us and the mountains now. By the time they reached their spot beside a quiet stream, twilight had settled like a soft blanket over the valley. The clearing looked untouched, wildflowers growing around a ring of stones, a fallen log perfect for sitting, and the faint rush of water nearby. Lily helped set up the tent, her small flashlight bouncing over the canvas as Mark hammered in the stakes. The air turned cooler, and soon the comforting crackle of their campfire filled the space between them. The orange glow painted their faces while they roasted marshmallows and watched sparks drift into the starry black sky. Mark told her stories about his own childhood trips to these mountains, how he and his brother used to fish in the same stream, how at night they'd swear they heard someone whistling far away even though no one else was there. Lily giggled, but her eyes occasionally darted toward the dark treeline behind them. The forest was too still now. Not even the usual chirp of crickets or distant owl calls. Just silence, thick and unmoving. Then, faintly, came a sound, metal scraping against rock, soft but sharp. Mark froze, his hand pausing midair with the roasting stick. Probably just a branch, he muttered, forcing a smile. But he stood and aimed his flashlight toward the trees. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating nothing but tangled roots and a wall of fog. The sound stopped. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, came a slow, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps dragging through gravel. Lily whispered, "Uncle Mark, someone's out there." Her voice trembled slightly. He walked a few steps toward the noise, scanning the shadows, but the moment his light shifted, the mist seemed to move with it, swallowing whatever was beyond. When he turned back, Lily's dog, a small terrier, was growling low, staring into the dark. The wind picked up suddenly, sending the fire into a brief flare. For just a second, Lily thought she saw a shape between the trees, a tall figure, motionless, pale against the dark bark. Then it was gone. Mark returned to the fire, brushing off his jacket. "We're fine, kiddo. Probably an animal." But his tone didn't match his words. He kept glancing toward the forest, pretending to poke at the fire while his hand quietly checked the flashlight batteries again. They decided to turn in early. As they zipped the tent shut, the sound returned, closer this time, softer, as if circling the camp. Lily clutched her sleeping bag, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The dog whimpered once and then went silent. Outside, the forest waited, breathing with them. Somewhere in that vast, endless dark, something was moving, slow, deliberate, watching. And before dawn, the fire outside flickered one last time and died, leaving only the whisper of the stream in the cold mountain air. That was the last night anyone ever saw them. The sun barely rose over the Cascades the next morning before a ranger's radio broke the stillness with a distress call. A hiker had stumbled upon an abandoned campsite deep in the valley, tent collapsed, belongings scattered, and not a trace of the people who had set it up. By the time the first search team arrived, mist still hung thick over the trees, swallowing their footsteps as they approached the clearing. The air felt heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. The tent lay partially torn, the poles bent as if by force, but not by any animal. Nearby, 2 camping chairs were overturned, and a half-burned log sat cold in the fire ring. A pan of beans rested beside it, untouched and beginning to rust. Nothing seemed stolen, yet everything felt wrong. One of the searchers, a woman named Dana, called out, "Mark." "Lily." Her voice carried through the valley but came back as a hollow echo. There was no answer, only the low hiss of the wind moving through the trees. The team spread out, marking the area with bright orange tape. They found the truck parked at the base of the hill, keys still in the ignition, and the backseat filled with extra supplies that were never used. Lily's favorite backpack leaned against a rock beside the stream, zipped neatly as if she had placed it there herself. Inside were a notebook, a few pencils, and a small Polaroid of her and her uncle smiling by the fire from the night before. The edges of the photo were damp but intact. When the K9 unit arrived, the dogs caught a scent trail leading north along the river. The prints were clear at first, 2 sets, 1 adult and 1 child, heading toward the woods. But after less than 100 yards, the tracks simply vanished. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if they had stepped off the earth entirely. The dogs circled, confused, whining softly before refusing to move further. The team marked the spot as the last known location. Helicopters flew overhead for the next 2 days, sweeping the forest with thermal cameras, but nothing appeared. Not a single heat signature. Divers searched the nearby river, fearing the worst, but the water was clear. Everything looked untouched, perfectly normal, except for the eerie stillness that lingered in the air. One ranger swore he heard laughter echoing through the canyon the first night of the search. A high, childlike giggle carried on the wind, but when they followed it, there was nothing there. By the end of the week, dozens of volunteers had joined. They combed the trails, set up bright tents, and called their names through loudspeakers. At night, they gathered around fires, whispering theories: bear attack, kidnapping, even an accident in the cliffs. But the sheriff shook his head each time. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no drag marks. Only a single clue that made no sense: a footprint pressed deep into the mud near the ravine, larger than a man's boot, and barefoot. It pointed away from the camp, toward the densest part of the forest, an area not marked on any current map. By the end of the 3rd week, the search was scaled down. Reporters came and went, snapping photos of the empty clearing now littered with police markers. Rain washed away the footprints, and the mountain returned to silence. The final report listed them as missing, presumed dead. But among the search team, no one truly believed the mountain had let them go. One volunteer, before leaving, carved a small cross into a nearby tree and whispered, "If you're still out there, we'll find you." The wind answered with a sigh that almost sounded like a breath. 5 years passed, and the story of Lily and Mark slowly slipped from the headlines, fading into the realm of local legend. Yet in the small mountain towns that bordered the Cascades, their names were never truly forgotten. The old rangers who had been part of the original search still spoke of that strange summer, the one when the forest felt alive. They remembered the silence, the way their radios cut out near the ridge, the coldness that settled over the campsite long after the sun had risen. To outsiders, it was just another tragic disappearance. But to those who lived nearby, it was something else, something the mountains had taken. Tourists came and went, drawn by the beauty of the trails and waterfalls, unaware that just a few miles beyond the marked paths, 2 lives had vanished without a trace. On foggy evenings, hikers claimed to hear faint music drifting through the valleys, like a child's lullaby carried on the wind. A few swore they had seen a dim light flickering deep in the trees, too bright for a reflection, too slow for a flashlight. The locals stopped camping near that area altogether, calling it the Quiet Hollow. Every now and then, a story resurfaced online. Someone would post an old photo of the search site or a blurry picture they claimed showed a girl standing between the pines, her hair tangled, her clothes ragged. It always sparked a few days of debate before being dismissed as a hoax. Still, those who lived closest said the forest hadn't been the same since that summer. Birds avoided the treetops there, and the animals grew restless at night. Hunters sometimes found strange symbols carved into the bark, simple spirals, circles, and long vertical slashes, as if someone had been keeping count of days. In town, Mark's sister, Lily's mother, kept their pictures pinned to her refrigerator door. Every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, she drove to the base of the trail and left fresh flowers on the old wooden sign that warned hikers of steep terrain. She still talked to them as if they could hear, telling them about the weather, about the neighbors, about how she still dreamed of them both standing in the doorway, smiling. Each year, the flowers would wilt and vanish. Sometimes, when she returned the following morning, they'd be gone entirely, no trace left behind. One winter, a group of campers tried to set up near the same stream where Lily and Mark had last been seen. They packed up before midnight. They later told rangers they had heard what sounded like footsteps pacing outside their tent and a child humming an unfamiliar tune. The next morning, they found small handprints pressed into the condensation on their tent flap, too small for any of their group. By now, the legend had taken on a life of its own. Some said the forest was cursed, others believed the two had stumbled into one of the old, uncharted mine shafts that dotted the Cascades. A few whispered of something older, a spirit tied to the land, a watcher, that lured travelers who strayed too far from the trails. No one could agree on what it was, but everyone agreed on one thing: the Cascades had claimed them, and no one who went looking ever stayed long. Even the sheriff who had led the original search refused to discuss it anymore. But sometimes, on stormy nights, he'd glance toward the mountains from his porch and swear he saw two small lights flickering near the ridge, as if someone were still camping out there, waiting to come home. It was early autumn when Dylan Harper arrived in the Cascades with a backpack full of camera gear and the kind of restless energy only thrill seekers carry. He was a base jumper, a drone pilot, and a self-styled adventure vlogger who chased remote cliffs and wild stories for his growing online audience. The forest greeted him with a crisp chill, the scent of pine and moss rising with the mist as he drove his off-road truck toward the cliffs known as Devil's Spine, a towering ridge overlooking miles of untouched wilderness. He had no idea he was camping near the same place Lily and Mark vanished 5 years earlier. Dylan was drawn to the location by a viral rumor that the ridge had once been closed after a strange incident, though no one could say exactly what happened. That kind of mystery made perfect content. As he unloaded his gear, helmet cam, GoPro chest rig, drone, parachute pack, he laughed to himself, imagining the video title, "Base Jumping in the Most Haunted Mountain Range in America." The forest was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant rush of a waterfall somewhere below. He checked his drone battery, started recording, and sent it skyward. From above, the view was breathtaking. The cliffs dropped into a valley choked with fog, the sunlight breaking through in golden streaks. Rivers glimmered like veins of silver, and the trees swayed in unison, endless and ancient. As Dylan narrated into his mic, the drone camera captured something odd: a flicker of light near the treeline, a brief reflection, like glass catching the sun. He thought it might be an old piece of equipment or even a bit of metal from a long-forgotten campsite. Curious, he marked the coordinates for later exploration. That night, after a successful jump and some adrenaline-fueled celebration recorded for his channel, Dylan sat by his campfire, reviewing the day's footage on his laptop. The forest around him was pitch black, his only light the orange glow of the fire and the dim LED from his screen. When the drone footage reached the section near the treeline, he froze. For less than 2 seconds, a figure appeared in the corner of the frame, a person, or at least something shaped like one, standing completely still. Its silhouette was faint, distorted by the fog. The reflective flash wasn't sunlight, it was the glint of eyes. Dylan leaned closer, replaying it several times. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, but it was there, too defined to be a trick of the camera. He muttered to himself, probably a hiker, maybe a reflection. But as he scrolled through the drone's GPS path, he realized that part of the forest wasn't on any of his maps. It was a closed section, restricted due to unstable ground and past disappearances. Outside, the fire crackled louder, and a cold gust swept through the camp, scattering ash into the darkness. Dylan looked up from the screen, suddenly aware of how quiet the forest had become. The usual nighttime chorus, crickets, owls, even the breeze, was gone. Only the faint sound of running water remained. He turned his camera toward the woods and zoomed in, scanning the darkness. Nothing moved, but for a fleeting second, he thought he saw a light flicker between the trees, like a lantern swaying gently. He told himself it was exhaustion, the aftershock of adrenaline. He turned off his screen, crawled into his sleeping bag, and shut his eyes. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Every time he began to drift off, he heard it again, the faint clicking of metal on stone, slow and steady, coming from somewhere in the forest. He held his breath and listened. The sound stopped. Then came a whisper, too soft to make out, like a child humming under her breath. Dylan sat up, heart pounding, gripping his flashlight. He shone it through the tent mesh, the beam cutting across the dark. Nothing but trees. When he finally fell asleep near dawn, his camera, still on the tripod by the fire, blinked red. It had started recording on its own. The lens focused slowly toward the treeline, as if drawn by movement. And just for a moment, it caught something pale watching from the shadows. Night had settled heavily over the Cascades when the search teams began their final sweep of the 5th day. The moon hung low, its pale glow barely piercing through the forest canopy. Searchlights flickered across the rugged terrain, casting fleeting shadows on the towering evergreens. Volunteers moved methodically, their voices crackling through radios, coordinating every move. But beneath the surface of duty, exhaustion and despair were beginning to take hold. The girl and her uncle had been missing for nearly a week, and the forest, vast, untamed, and unforgiving, seemed to swallow every clue before it could be found. A small command post had been set up near the trailhead where their car was discovered, still locked, with a folded map of the area in the passenger seat. The air inside the tent smelled of coffee and damp paper. Photos of the missing, the smiling 12-year-old girl, her eyes bright with excitement, and her rugged but kind-looking uncle, were pinned to a corkboard surrounded by search grids and topographic maps marked with red circles. Every lead had led to a dead end. Search dogs had picked up faint traces but lost the scent by a fast-moving stream that cut deep through the canyon. It was as if they had simply vanished into the wilderness. Detective Harper, who had been overseeing the search, stood outside the tent staring into the darkness. He had seen cases like this before, but something about this one unsettled him. The girl's mother had begged him not to stop searching, her voice breaking over the phone, saying she could still feel her daughter out there. Harper wanted to believe her, but experience told him the forest didn't give back what it took easily. As dawn approached, the fog began to roll in thick and cold. A few searchers, drained and shivering, sat by the fire discussing theories. Maybe they'd wandered off the trail, maybe a fall, maybe an animal attack. But Harper couldn't shake a different feeling. There had been strange reports from this region before, lights seen in the sky, distorted sounds echoing at night, hikers vanishing without explanation. Locals whispered that the Cascades had places people weren't meant to find. He turned his eyes toward the steep slopes beyond the camp, where the mist curled like smoke and the forest grew impossibly dense. Somewhere out there, he thought, was an answer. But whether it was one the world was ready to hear, that, he wasn't sure. As the sun rose weakly over the ridge, casting its first golden rays through the mist, the radios came alive with static and chatter. A team claimed they'd found something, a torn piece of red fabric caught on a branch near a ravine. Harper's pulse quickened. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reignite the search. The forest had given them a sign, and for the first time in days, hope returned. 5 years had passed since the girl and her uncle vanished in the Cascades, and the memory of their disappearance had faded into local legend. The search parties were long gone, the case labeled, unsolved, and the forest had reclaimed every trace of what once happened. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. It was a clear summer morning when a base jumper named Ryan and his friends arrived at a remote cliff deep within the Cascade Range. They were thrill seekers, adventurers chasing the rush of flight, not ghost stories. Their helmets were fitted with high-definition cameras, capturing every second of their jumps for their YouTube channel. Ryan had chosen this spot after seeing it on a satellite map, a sheer rock face overlooking a sprawling sea of evergreens, isolated and perfect. The group set up camp near the cliff's edge. The air was cool and carried the scent of pine and damp moss. They laughed, checked their gear, and went over safety routines. No one mentioned the missing campers whose story had become little more than a campfire myth in the nearby town. To them, the Cascades were just another playground for adrenaline junkies. As the sun began to sink behind the peaks, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Ryan strapped on his parachute and adjusted his. Morning light filtered through the canopy as Ryan and his two friends, Lucas and Jenna, prepared for the hike down into the valley. The footage from last night still played in Ryan's mind on a loop, the flicker of metal, the strange red cloth, the feeling that something was watching. It didn't feel like just another adventure anymore. The forest, usually so peaceful, now seemed heavy with unspoken memories. Every gust of wind whispered through the trees like a warning. They packed light, water, a few protein bars, a GPS, and Ryan's camera. The descent wasn't easy. The path was overgrown, and roots tangled underfoot like the forest itself wanted to slow them down. Every now and then, they stopped to check the footage again, trying to line up the camera's angle with the landscape before them. The valley stretched out in folds of mist and pine, beautiful but hauntingly quiet. No birds, no insects, no sound except their boots crunching against damp leaves. After nearly 2 hours, they reached an area that looked eerily familiar from the footage. Ryan's pulse quickened. He pointed to a ridge where the light had glinted in the video. The three of them climbed over rocks slick with moss, each step echoing louder in the stillness. Then, out of the corner of Jenna's eye, something caught her attention, a faint shimmer among the trees. They approached slowly. There, half buried under leaves and moss, was the remains of a small campsite. A rusted camping stove, a torn tarp, a faded backpack, its straps stiff with time. The air felt different now, colder, almost sacred. Ryan crouched and brushed the moss away from a metal object, revealing a cooking pot. Inside it, to his shock, were bones. Small ones. Human. Jenna gasped and covered her mouth. Lucas whispered something under his breath, but Ryan couldn't hear. His heart was hammering too loudly. Just beyond the pot, the corner of a weathered tent poked from beneath years of overgrowth. The red cloth they'd seen in the footage wasn't fabric, it was the tattered corner of a rain jacket. A child's rain jacket. Ryan turned on his camera, hands trembling slightly, recording everything. He didn't know what he was documenting anymore, an adventure, or a crime scene. As he panned the lens across the site, something strange appeared in the background, a pile of stones arranged deliberately in a circular pattern, with a wooden carving standing upright in the center. It was shaped like a face, crude and expressionless, staring toward them. A chill ran through the group. Lucas muttered that they should leave, that this place wasn't right. But Ryan felt compelled to keep looking. He moved toward the carving, brushing away debris around it. At its base, he noticed another metallic glint, a flashlight, covered in mud. When he picked it up, he saw a faint engraving scratched into the handle, Maddie and Uncle Ben. The name hit him like a blow. He remembered it, the story from 5 years ago, the little girl and her uncle who vanished during a camping trip in the Cascades. Ryan looked up at his friends, his face pale. There was no denying it now. This wasn't a coincidence. Before they could say anything else, the forest shifted. A branch cracked somewhere in the distance. Then another. Slow, deliberate steps echoed between the trees. The three froze, every instinct screaming at them to run. The camera was still rolling as Ryan slowly turned toward the sound, toward the shadows moving just beyond the clearing, realizing that whatever had happened here 5 years ago might not be over at all. The sound of snapping branches grew louder, deliberate, and close. Ryan's breath hitched as he slowly turned the camera toward the tree line. The forest, moments ago eerily still, now felt alive, watching. Lucas raised his flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the mist. For a moment, nothing. Then, movement, a dark figure slipping between the trunks, too fast to fully see, too quiet to be an animal. Jenna whispered, "We need to go," her voice barely more than air. But Ryan couldn't move. The adrenaline pinned him in place, caught between fear and fascination. His instinct screamed danger, yet something deeper, curiosity, obsession, forced him to stay. He took a slow step forward, camera trembling in his grip. The shadows shifted again, and this time, a low sound emerged. A groan, human-like but distorted, echoing off the trees. Lucas swore under his breath and grabbed Ryan's arm, pulling him back. "We're leaving," he hissed, eyes wide with panic. But before they could retreat, the flashlight beam caught something just ahead, a torn piece of fabric hanging from a branch. It was the same material as the child's jacket they had found earlier. Ryan zoomed in on it with the camera. The lens focused, then blurred, then caught something just below the fabric, a hand. Pale, motionless, sticking out from beneath a thick layer of moss and soil. The forest seemed to stop breathing. Jenna screamed. Lucas stumbled backward, tripping over a root, while Ryan fell to his knees beside the hand, brushing away the dirt. It wasn't a full body, just an arm, severed long ago, bones jutting through weathered skin. The horror hit all at once. This was real. These weren't remains of animals or relics of time, they had found human remains, and not just one set. Nearby, half sunken into the ground, was what looked like another skeleton. Smaller. A child's. The realization hit like a wave of ice, this was Maddie and her uncle. Or what was left of them. Ryan's hands shook violently as he tried to steady the camera. The footage caught Jenna crying quietly, Lucas muttering prayers, and Ryan's face, pale, hollow-eyed, transfixed. He knew they had to leave, call authorities, do something. But then the sound came again, closer this time. A soft, wet shuffle in the leaves. Ryan swung the camera toward the direction of the noise, the lens jittering with every breath. Between two trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing, a figure stood. It wasn't clear, more silhouette than shape, tall, thin, unmoving. Its head tilted slightly as if observing them. Ryan's mind screamed to run, but his body didn't obey. The figure took one slow step forward, and the forest went utterly silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Lucas snapped out of it first. He grabbed Jenna by the arm and shouted at Ryan to move. The three of them ran, crashing through branches, stumbling over rocks, hearts pounding like drums. Behind them, something heavy moved through the forest, not running, but following, steady, relentless. Ryan didn't stop recording. The footage shook violently, flashes of trees and light, gasps and shouts. It was pure chaos. When they finally burst out into the open ridge, gasping for air, Ryan turned back one last time. The forest behind them looked calm again, motionless, as if nothing had happened. No sound, no shadow, no proof of what they'd seen. But when they reviewed the footage that night, they realized something terrifying: the figure wasn't gone. In the final seconds, just before Ryan turned away, a face had appeared between the trees. It was pale, expressionless, and unmistakably human, but its eyes gleamed with something ancient, something wrong. Ryan shut the laptop without a word. No one spoke. They all knew the truth: whatever had taken Maddie and her uncle wasn't finished. And now, it knew they had found it. The night that followed was long, suffocating, and restless. Ryan, Jenna, and Lucas sat around the small campfire, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange light that danced over the trees. No one spoke for a long time. The sounds of the forest, the crackle of firewood, the occasional snap of a twig, only heightened their unease. The footage they'd recorded still played over and over in Ryan's mind, the pale face between the trees seared into his memory. It hadn't been an illusion. They had all seen it. Lucas broke the silence first. "We need to leave at sunrise," he said, voice hoarse. "Whatever's down there isn't human." Jenna nodded silently, her eyes red from crying. Ryan said nothing. He was staring at the camera on his lap, the battery light blinking weakly. He wanted to delete the footage, to erase what they saw, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. A part of him, the same part that made him jump off cliffs for fun, needed to understand what they'd found. The air grew colder, unnaturally so. A fog began to roll in, thick and low, crawling along the ground like something alive. The flames flickered and dimmed, hissing softly as if smothered by invisible hands. Jenna shivered and pulled her jacket tighter. "Ryan," she whispered, "turn off the camera." But he didn't. He raised it again, scanning the tree line beyond the campfire. Through the mist, faint lights appeared. At first, they looked like fireflies, small, floating specks of yellow. But they moved in patterns, circling slowly, closing in. Lucas cursed and grabbed the flashlight, but it sputtered and went out. The air buzzed with a strange hum, low and pulsing, almost mechanical. Then came the whisper, faint at first, like the wind, then clearer, threading through the fog. "Ben, Maddie." Jenna froze. "That's not possible," she said, trembling. The voice came again, closer now. "Why did you come here?" Ryan's heart pounded. He spun the camera around, searching the darkness. The fog shifted, and for a split second, he caught sight of something: two figures standing just beyond the mist. One tall, one small. The shapes were translucent, pale, barely visible, but unmistakable. They stood side by side, motionless, as if waiting. Jenna screamed and stumbled backward. Lucas grabbed her arm, shouting for Ryan to run. But Ryan couldn't move. The taller figure, the one shaped like a man, lifted a hand, pointing directly at him. Ryan's camera zoomed in automatically, focusing on the hollow, empty sockets where eyes should have been. The lens crackled with static. Suddenly, a gust of wind roared through the camp, scattering ash and sparks. The fire went out completely. The forest plunged into darkness. Ryan heard Jenna sobbing, Lucas yelling, and something moving through the brush, fast, circling them. He switched the camera to night vision. The world turned green, ghostly. And there, just a few feet away, the figures were gone. But in their place, etched into the soil where they had stood, was a symbol, the same circular pattern of stones they had found near the remains. Ryan realized with horror that it wasn't random. It was a marker, a warning, or perhaps a boundary. The whisper returned, this time right beside his ear. You shouldn't have come back. Ryan dropped the camera and ran. The three of them tore through the forest, blinded by fog and panic. Branches whipped their faces, roots caught their feet. Behind them, the whispers multiplied, hundreds of voices now, overlapping, murmuring, crying, chanting. The forest seemed alive, vibrating with something ancient and angry. When they finally reached the cliff's edge where they had first jumped, dawn was breaking, pale light spilling over the valley. They didn't stop running until they reached the van parked miles away. Only when the doors slammed shut did the voices fade. Ryan sat shaking, staring at the camera still clutched in his hand. Its screen flickered, showing static, and then, briefly, a frame of the girl and her uncle, smiling beside a campfire, just before it glitched into black. Jenna whispered, they were trying to tell us something. But Ryan couldn't answer. In his heart, he already knew, the forest wasn't done with them. It had marked them now, just as it had marked Maddie and Uncle Ben 5 years ago. Dawn broke over the Cascades like a ghost lifting its veil, soft, pale, and silent. The forest that had haunted them all night looked almost peaceful again, bathed in golden light. But Ryan, Jenna, and Lucas sat huddled in the van, still trembling, the events of the night echoing in their minds like a bad dream that refused to end. The camera lay between them on the dashboard, its lens cracked, its screen dark. Ryan hadn't dared to turn it back on since the final flicker, that haunting frame of Maddie and Uncle Ben smiling before the screen went black. For a long time, no one spoke. Jenna clutched her knees, staring out at the mist that hung over the trees. Lucas kept glancing at the forest as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge. Ryan just sat there, motionless, his hands still stained with soil from the campsite. He wanted to drive away, leave it all behind, but something deep inside told him it wouldn't matter. Whatever they had stumbled into wasn't confined to that valley. It had followed them. When he finally turned the key, the van engine sputtered to life, and the radio crackled, though no one had touched it. At first, it was just static, but then a faint sound bled through. A child's laughter. Maddie's laughter. Jenna screamed and covered her ears. Lucas slammed his hand against the dial, but the knob wouldn't move. The static grew louder, swelling into a chorus of voices, some pleading, some angry, some whispering words that made no sense. Then, as suddenly as it started, silence. Ryan switched the radio off and stared at the forest. We have to tell someone, he said finally, voice shaking. The police, rangers, anyone. But even as he said it, he knew it sounded hopeless. The last search had happened 5 years ago. The authorities had combed these mountains and found nothing. Would they believe 3 terrified hikers with a broken camera and a story about ghosts in the woods? Still, they drove. Down winding dirt roads, past shadowed pines, past the trailhead sign half swallowed by moss. For hours, no one spoke. But as they neared the main highway, Ryan's phone buzzed, a notification from his cloud storage. Automatically, the footage from his camera had uploaded during the night. Heart pounding, he opened it. The files were there, dozens of clips, time-stamped, clear. He tapped the last one, the one that had ended in static. The video began as expected, the fog, the firelight, the shapes in the distance. But as it played on, Ryan noticed something that hadn't been there before. A new frame. A brief shot, no more than a second, of their camp from above, as if filmed from the trees. The 3 of them were sleeping, and just behind them, in the dark, stood 2 figures. Watching. One tall, one small. Maddie and Uncle Ben. Ryan's hands went cold. He paused the video, but before he could close it, the camera feed shifted again. Now, the forest was empty, but words appeared, scrawled in white across the screen. You shouldn't have left. Then the video cut out completely. Jenna started crying again. Lucas muttered that they needed to destroy the footage, to delete everything before it got worse. But Ryan couldn't. He stared at the screen, transfixed, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. They're trapped, he whispered. They're still there. That night, long after they reached town, Ryan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 2 figures standing among the trees, their faces blurred but familiar. At 3 a.m., he opened his laptop. The files were gone, every single one. In their place was a new folder named Return. He clicked it. Inside was a single video. He pressed play. The image was shaky, as if filmed by hand. The camera moved through the same forest trail, past the same rocks and moss, toward the same clearing. But this time, he could hear his own voice, breathing heavily behind the lens. It wasn't old footage. It was happening now. The final frame froze on the entrance of the valley, where a figure stood waiting, smiling faintly. Ryan stared at the screen, frozen. Then the camera turned, toward him. The lights in his room flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a faint whisper echoed through the speakers. "Welcome back, Ryan," and the screen went black.